Welcome back to the deep dive. We're here again to sift through that mountain of research, all the dense articles, the primary sources, the expert takes, and boil it down to what you really need to know. Today, we're setting our sights on the 16th century, and specifically on one of history's most complex, powerful figures, the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman I. Our mission, really, is to get under the skin of the sources that describe his, 46-year reign, from 1520 right through to 1566. And this period, you have to understand, this was the absolute peak. The Ottoman Empire's zenith in terms of political clout, economic strength, military reach, ruling over something like 25 million people. When you're looking for a historical benchmark for a truly global empire at its height, well, Suleiman's reign is pretty much it.
Absolutely. And the fascinating thing right from the start is this inherent tension in the man himself. You see it perfectly in his two different reputations. In the West, they were mostly focused on his military power, this unstoppable force. So they called him Suleiman the Magnificent, Muhtasham Suleiman, the conqueror, splendid but terrifying. But back in his own vast, incredibly diverse empire, he was known for something quite different. He was Suleiman the lawgiver, Suleiman.
Right.
And managing that balance, the magnificent conqueror who could also fund and enforce the work of a meticulous administrator, that's really the key to understanding his whole legacy.
It's striking when you look at his titles, too. They weren't just about ruling the Ottomans. They suggest something much bigger, right? Claim to universal power.
Oh, completely. That long list of titles wasn't just for show. It was a political statement, a blueprint almost. He was the custodian of the two holy mosques, Shah of Baghdad, Sultan of Egypt. But the one that really stands out, the most aggressive claim, was Caesar of Rome.
Rome.
Caesar of Rome, that's bold. It's incredibly bold. It wasn't just some historical nod. By taking that title, the title of the ancient Roman emperors, he was explicitly saying the Ottoman Empire was the legitimate successor to Rome. And that put him, politically at least, above his Christian rivals, especially the Holy Roman Emperor Charles V. It was a calculated diplomatic power play, backed up, of course, by overwhelming military strength.
So before we get into those huge claims and the wars that backed them up, let's just get a picture of the man himself. Born in Trabzon, 1494, son of Selim I, who was, known for being pretty ruthless but also very successful.
That's right. Suleiman came to the throne in September 1520. He was only 26. But crucially, he hadn't spent his youth idle. Unlike some princes before him, he'd had real practical experience. He served as governor first in Kaffa, then in Manisa. And these weren't just ceremonial posts. They were proper administrative apprenticeships. He learned logistics, how to manage diverse populations, basically how to govern on a grand scale. That experience was vital.
And it was around this time during his development that he formed this incredibly close relationship that would really shape the first part of his reign.
Yes. With Pargali Ibrahim. Ibrahim was originally a Greek slave captured in one of the wars with Venice. Their friendship became incredibly intense. It went beyond just companionship. It was this deep bond of trust that kind of ignored the usual social rules. Ibrahim rose incredibly fast alongside Suleiman. He became Grand Vizier, his most trusted advisor in military and administrative matters. It was a relationship that, it eventually ended tragically, as we'll see, but initially it was the powerhouse driving the empire's early successes.
Okay, let's unpack that magnificent title then. The sources covering his early years are just packed with military campaigns, rapid expansion, establishing him as the dominant force in Europe and the Middle East.
He really didn't waste any time. His father, Selim, had focused mainly on the east, right? But Suleiman immediately turned his attention west. Taking Belgrade in 1521 was huge. It was something his own great-grandfather, Mehmed the Conqueror, hadn't managed. Belgrade was this incredibly strong fortress held by the Hungarians. Its fall was strategically vital. It secured the Danube route and basically opened the road straight towards Vienna. Belgrade quickly became the second biggest Ottoman city in Europe after Constantinople itself, a crucial forward base.
And that momentum carried him right into the Mediterranean, didn't it? Controlling those sea lanes was essential for trade and denying European powers safe havens.
Exactly. Which brings us to Rhodes. Between 1522 and 1523, Rhodes was the base for the Knights Hospitaller. From the Ottoman perspective, they were basically state-sanctioned pirates, constantly raiding shipping between Istanbul, Egypt, the Levant.
So they had to go.
They had to go. The siege was incredibly tough, lasted 5 months. Suleiman did succeed in forcing the knights out, famously allowing them to leave, and they eventually ended up in Malta, but the cost was immense. The sources talk about maybe 50,000, even 60,000 Ottoman deaths from battle, but also a huge amount from disease during the long siege.
Wow.
It tells you something important right away. Even these magnificent victories came at a staggering human cost. Resources were finite, even for Suleiman.
But the real military peak in Europe, the battle that echoed for centuries, was the Battle of Mohacs in 1526. This sounds like more than just a battle. It was like the end of a kingdom.
Mohacs was absolutely a turning point in Central European history. The Ottoman army, led by Suleiman personally, just crushed the forces of Louis II of Hungary. It was so complete, so devastating that the entire Hungarian royal army was essentially wiped out.
Right.
The Jagiellonian dynasty's rule in Hungary and Bohemia effectively ended in a single afternoon. The political vacuum it created was immediate, massive.
Yeah.
It led directly to Hungary being partitioned and kicked off that long conflict with the Habsburgs.
There's that story, though, cited in the sources, about Suleiman's reaction right after this huge, decisive win. A moment of unexpected reflection.
Yes, it's often mentioned. It adds a layer to his character, doesn't it? Apparently, when they found the body of the young King Louis II, he drowned trying to escape the battlefield. Suleiman is supposed to have expressed real sorrow. Something like he hadn't wanted the king to be cut off before he scarcely tasted the sweets of life and royalty. Now, whether that's exactly what he said or maybe a bit of diplomatic spin, who knows? But it hints at an awareness, maybe, of the burdens of rule, even a respect for his defeated enemy.
But the ultimate prize, the symbol of Central Europe, was always Vienna. And that's where this seemingly unstoppable Ottoman advance finally hit a wall.
The Siege of Vienna in 1529 was the absolute high-water mark of Ottoman ambition in Europe. Its failure, and then the failure of a second attempt in 1532, wasn't really down to the defenders' military genius, although they fought bravely. It was mostly about logistics collapsing. The sources consistently point to two main things: terrible weather, really heavy rain, then early snow that bogged down the army's incredibly long march.
So they couldn't bring the big guns.
Exactly. They had to abandon the heavy siege cannons they needed to breach Vienna's walls. And fundamentally, their supply lines were just stretched too thin. The sheer size of the Ottoman army meant its logistical tail couldn't keep up over that distance, especially in bad conditions. Vienna really marked a strategic shift. It showed the practical limits of Ottoman power projection deep into Europe.
And so the rivalry with the Habsburgs then shifts, partly at least, from the battlefield to the negotiating table. And Suleiman seems to have gained the upper hand there too, forcing them into a position that looks almost like vassalage.
Oh, the diplomatic maneuvering here is quite something. The Treaty of Constantinople in 1533 was, frankly, humiliating for the Habsburgs. Ferdinand I had to recognize Ottoman control over most of Hungary, agreed to pay an annual tribute, and this is the real kicker: he had to accept that the Ottoman Grand Vizier, who was technically the Sultan's slave, was his equal in rank.
His equal, not the Sultan's equal, but the Grand Vizier's.
Precisely. It was a deliberate public slapdown, reducing Ferdinand from a sovereign monarch to basically a tributary prince in Ottoman eyes.
And this connects back to that Caesar of Rome title you mentioned earlier. He kept pushing that claim.
He absolutely did. Later campaigns against Ferdinand's brother, the Emperor Charles V, particularly between 1541 and 1544, led to another treaty. And the language in that treaty is very specific. It refers to Charles V only as the King of Spain, not Emperor. By refusing to use Charles's highest imperial title, Suleiman was implicitly reserving that universal title, Caesar, solely for himself. It was a diplomatic masterstroke, reinforcing his claim to be the supreme ruler.
Okay, let's shift focus eastward now. The other major power, the other big rival, was the Safavid Empire in Persia, led by Shah Tahmasp. And this wasn't just about land, was it? There was a deep religious divide, too.
A fundamental religious clash. The Ottomans were Sunni Muslims, positioning themselves as the defenders of Islamic orthodoxy. The Safavids were Shia Muslims. That difference was irreconcilable in the 16th century context. The main trigger for the big wars was when the Safavids had the governor of Baghdad, who was loyal to Suleiman, killed. Suleiman's response was massive. He invaded, annexed Mesopotamia, and made this grand symbolic entry into Baghdad in 1535.
And once he was there, he moved quickly to shore up his religious credentials, didn't he?
He did, very shrewdly. To win over the local Sunni population, which was crucial for actually holding on to the territory, Suleiman immediately ordered the restoration of the tomb of Abu Hanifa. Abu Hanifa was the founder of the Hanafi school of Islamic law, the official legal school of the Ottoman Empire. So restoring his tomb was a powerful symbol. Suleiman wasn't just a conqueror, he was the protector of true Islam against the heretical Safavids.
But the Safavids developed a military strategy that proved really difficult for the Ottomans, even with their massive army.
Shah Damask was smart. He knew he couldn't beat the Ottomans in a conventional pish battle.
Yep.
They had superior numbers, superior artillery, so he refused to fight them head-on. Instead, he used scorched earth tactics. He'd retreat, destroy crops, poison wells, basically leave nothing for the massive Ottoman army to live off. This forced the Ottomans deeper into hostile territory, unable to resupply. And then they'd be exposed to the Caucasus winter, which was brutal. It was a highly effective, if costly, strategy for the Safavids. It inflicted huge losses on the Ottomans through attrition, not battle.
So geography and logistics again proved to be the real limits on Ottoman power.
Time and again, yes. Ultimately, the conflict ground down into a kind of stalemate, leading to the Peace of Amasya in 1555. This treaty basically drew the borders, partitioning Armenia and Georgia between the two empires. Crucially for the Ottomans, though, it secured their permanent control over Iraq and gave them vital access to the Persian Gulf. It stabilized the eastern frontier for a good while.
Now, moving beyond land wars, Suleiman clearly understood that real global power in this era meant controlling the seas as well. He oversaw a major shift towards naval strength.
That was a transformative decision. The pivotal moment was appointing Kheyr ed-Din, better known in the West as Barbarossa, as his admiral-in-chief. Suleiman gave him the resources to completely rebuild and expand the Ottoman fleet. A big driver for this was economics. The Portuguese had rounded Africa and were starting to dominate the Indian Ocean trade routes, directly threatening the traditional Ottoman control over the spice trade coming overland or through the Red Sea to Europe.
So this naval buildup wasn't just about fighting Christian fleets in the Mediterranean. It was a global economic strategy.
Absolutely. It stretched right into the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. The Ottomans captured Aden in 1538, turning it into a key base. From Aden, they could launch raids against Portuguese ships and ports, trying to disrupt their dominance. And they worked hard to maintain strong trade links with the powerful Mughal Empire in India throughout the 16th century. That trade was a vital source of revenue for the whole Ottoman state, despite Portuguese efforts to cut it off.
And in the midst of all this global rivalry, you get this really strange diplomatic alignment, the Franco-Ottoman alliance, a Muslim empire and a major Catholic kingdom teaming up.
It was definitely the odd couple of 16th century diplomacy. And yes, for many in Christian Europe, it was utterly scandalous. But it was pure realpolitik. Both France, under Francis I, and the Ottoman Empire had the same overriding enemy, the Habsburg Emperor Charles V, whose lands encircled France. So they made common cause against him.
And these weren't just vague promises of support.
No, the terms discussed, especially when Francis died in Taft. I wanted to renew the alliance around 1542, were concrete and quite stunning. The Ottomans apparently pledged something like 60,000 troops and 150 galleys to operate directly against Habsburg lands in coordination with the French. This alliance deeply entangled the Ottoman military machine in the complex balance of power politics within Europe itself.
But even with this immense reach, land and sea, the sources show that Suleiman the Magnificent wasn't invincible. The Great Siege of Malta in 1565 seems like a major setback.
It was a significant defeat, yeah. Remember the Knights Hospitaller, the ones Suleiman had kicked out of Rhodes decades earlier? Well, they'd been given Malta by Charles V and had fortified it. In 1565, Suleiman sent a huge Ottoman force, one of the largest fleets assembled in that period, to finally destroy them. The siege was incredibly long and brutal, lasting for months through the hot summer. But the Knights, led by their Grand Master Jean de Valette, put up ferocious resistance. And when a Spanish relief force finally managed to land, the Ottomans were forced to abandon the siege and retreat. The losses were heavy. Estimates suggest around 10,000 Ottoman troops, many of them elite soldiers, were killed. Malta was a major blow, both militarily and psychologically. It showed there were limits to Ottoman expansion, even at sea. So this seems like a good point to pivot. We've talked a lot about the magnificent conqueror, the outward focus on expansion and military might. Now let's turn inward to the Canoni the lawgiver. The ruler focused on order, justice, and administration within that vast empire.
Right, and it's crucial to understand first that Ottoman law wasn't just one single thing, was it? There were distinct types of law operating.
Exactly. The absolute foundation was the Sharia. This is Islamic sacred law, derived from the Quran and the Prophet's traditions. Critically, the Sharia was considered divine and immutable. The Sultan couldn't change it. However, the Sharia often provided general principles, not detailed rules for every situation in a complex, multi-religious, rapidly growing empire. So alongside it, you had the canons. Canons were essentially sultanic laws. They depended entirely on the Sultan's authority and his will. They covered all the practical stuff: criminal law, land ownership rules, especially for non-Muslims, and the incredibly complex tax systems that varied hugely across the empire.
So the challenge wasn't just writing new laws, but making sure the Sultan's laws, the canons, work smoothly with the divine Sharia without contradicting it.
That's precisely the point. And this is where Suleiman, working very closely with his top legal advisor, the Sheikhul Islam Ibn Saud Effendi, really excelled. This period is sometimes called the Great Harmonization. Their goal was to reform the canons, make them consistent, systematic, and comprehensive, but always framing them in a way that appeared compatible with or complementary to the Sharia.
What did they actually do during this harmonization that made the resulting codes so long-lasting?
It was a massive undertaking. Suleiman ordered the collection and codification of all the decrees and judgments issued by the 9 Ottoman sultans who came before him. This huge compilation resulted in the Kanun-i-Osmani, the Ottoman laws. Before this, laws could sometimes feel inconsistent depending on the region or the current sultan. By codifying them, Suleiman created precedent, stability, predictability. This comprehensive legal framework essentially acted like a constitution for the administration of the empire. And it was so well structured, so thorough, that it remained the basis of Ottoman administrative law for, incredibly, over 300 years.
3 centuries! That's remarkable longevity. What did this mean in practice for the average person living in the empire?
It meant a move towards more consistency and fairness, less arbitrary local justice. Take criminal law, for instance. Suleiman's canons significantly reduced the number of offenses that automatically carried the harshest penalties, like death or mutilation. Instead, for many crimes, they prescribed specific fixed fines. This standardization meant that, in theory at least, justice was more predictable, whether you're in Belgrade or Cairo or Damascus. It created a more stable legal environment for everyone.
And the sources also mention him using this legal power specifically to protect minority groups.
Yes, and that's a really powerful example of the lawgiver in action. Sometime in late 1553 or 1554, Suleiman issued a firman that's a formal imperial decree explicitly denouncing blood libels against the Jewish communities in the empire.
The blood libel being that false accusation about Jews using Christian blood.
Exactly. A dangerous, persistent anti-Semitic myth that often led to violence. Apparently, his personal physician, Moses Hayman, who was Jewish, advised him on this. For the Sultan himself to issue a formal decree condemning this, protecting a minority group from baseless accusations, shows a very proactive use of the canon power to enforce social order and a degree of justice.
Beyond just the courts and laws, Suleiman also invested heavily in standardizing and upgrading public services like education, right? Seeing them as part of the state's duty.
Definitely. Education was seen as vital for both religious piety and state administration. The higher-level madrasas, or colleges established during his reign, were essentially universities. They trained not just the imams and religious scholars, but also the highly educated bureaucrats needed to run the empire's complex legal and tax systems. And crucially, these educational centers weren't standalone. They were usually built as part of large mosque complexes, integrated with other public services like libraries, hospitals, the darushia for public baths, or hammams, and soup kitchens, the imarets, providing free food.
So it was like a whole civic center complex.
Exactly. Centralized, state-funded hubs for welfare, health, and learning. It was a remarkably modern concept for the 16th century, projecting the Sultan's power, but also his benevolence.
This sense of order, structure, and magnificence that he brought through law seems perfectly mirrored in his patronage of arts, literature, architecture. This really was the Ottoman Golden Age in culture.
It absolutely was. And it wasn't accidental. It was a deliberate, state-sponsored effort to project Ottoman power and sophistication through culture. Suleiman invested huge amounts of state funds into imperial patronage. He oversaw these imperial artistic societies, known collectively as the El-Ilirif, the community of the craftsmen. These weren't independent guilds. They were directly administered by the palace, the Topkapi Palace.
How big were these organizations?
They were massive. We have palace payroll registers from as early as 1526 that list something like 40 distinct societies with over 600 members. And these weren't just local Istanbul artisans. They actively recruited the most talented master craftsmen.
Yeah.
Calligraphers, painters, weavers, jewelers from all across the Islamic world, and even from newly conquered parts of Europe. This centralized system allowed them to blend different artistic traditions and, really for the first time, forge a distinct, powerful Ottoman imperial style. They were consciously moving beyond the earlier dominance of Persian artistic models.
And when you talk about Ottoman architecture in this era, one name dominates everything: Mimar Sinan.
Mimar Sinan is just legendary. He's often called the Michelangelo of Ottoman architecture, and the sheer volume and quality of his work is breathtaking. He came from the Janissary Corps, the elite soldiers, and rose to become the chief court architect in 1538, a position he held for 50 years until his death. He's credited with designing over 300 major structures across the empire: mosques, bridges, palaces, baths from the Balkans, deep into the Middle East. His buildings weren't just functional or beautiful, they were profound statements of the Sultan's power, wealth, stability, and piety.
Let's touch on a couple of his most famous works in Istanbul, the ones most associated with Suleiman.
Okay, well, one of the first major ones was the Shehzade Mosque complex, built between 1545 and 1548. Suleiman dedicated it to his favorite son, Shehzade Mehmed, who had died young. Architecturally, it's significant for its very symmetrical plan. The courtyard and the prayer hall are two equal squares. It represented a big step towards creating a unified, harmonious space under the central dome. But the absolute masterpiece, the building that truly symbolizes Suleiman's reign, has to be the Süleymaniye Mosque complex, built between 1550 and 1557.
That's the iconic one on the Istanbul skyline.
That's the one. Many scholars consider it the most magnificent mosque in the city. Sinan achieved this incredible sense of harmony and perfect symmetry with the dome structure, arguably refining and even surpassing the engineering of the Hagia Sophia nearby. Symbolically, it cemented Ottoman religious authority. And remember, like those other complexes, it was a whole city within a city. 4 general colleges, a medical college, a hospital, a public bath, kitchens, shops, and of course the mausoleums where Suleiman and his wife Hurrem are buried. It projected imperial permanence and care for the people.
And Suleiman's architectural patronage wasn't just limited to Istanbul, was it? He invested in holy sites across the empire, reinforcing his role as caliph.
Yes, that was very important. He funded major restoration projects, including the Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem. And crucially, the walls of Jerusalem, the old city walls you see today, are largely Suleiman's project. He also ordered extensive renovations of the Kaaba in Mecca. Investing in these core Islamic holy sites was vital for bolstering his claim as the legitimate leader and protector of the entire Muslim world, the custodian of the 2 holy mosques.
What's really fascinating is that Suleiman wasn't just paying for all this art, he was creating himself. He was an accomplished poet.
He was indeed. He wrote under the pen name Muhibi, which means lover, and he was highly regarded, writing in both Persian and Turkish. The historical sources, like the literary historian E.J.W. Gibb, emphasized just how much poetry was encouraged and flourished during his reign. Reading his poetry gives us this rare glimpse into the inner thoughts, perhaps, of this incredibly powerful ruler.
And there's that famous verse that seems to capture the paradox we started with, the magnificent conqueror reflecting on the real meaning of power in life.
It's a really telling piece, he writes essentially. The people think of wealth and power as the greatest fate, but in this world, a spell of health is the best state. He goes on. What men call sovereignty is a worldly strife and constant war. He goes on, worship of God is the highest throne, the happiest of all estates. I mean, think about that. This is arguably the most powerful man on earth at the time, and he's defining true happiness not through his conquests or his empire, but through spiritual devotion and simply being healthy. It's quite profound.
Before we move on from the cultural scene, there are a couple of other striking ways he projected his image. That incredible 4-tiered crown, for instance.
Yes, the famous crown. Commissioned in 1532, right around the time of the Vienna campaign, and at the height of his rivalry with Charles V. He got Venetian goldsmiths to make this absolutely spectacular 4-tiered ceremonial crown. The cost was astronomical, 115,000 ducats, a fortune. The 4 tiers were deliberately designed to outdo the Pope's 3-tiered tiara, and they were said to represent the 4 known continents, symbolizing his universal dominion.
So it wasn't really for wearing every day?
Probably not. It seems it was more for state ceremonies designed to absolutely dazzle visiting European ambassadors and visually assert his superiority over all other rulers, including the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, a very expensive piece of political theater.
And then something much simpler, but with equally long-lasting global impact, the tulip.
The humble tulip. Yes, Suleiman's court is credited with popularizing the tulip on a massive scale. It became a huge symbol of Ottoman wealth, refinement, and beauty. Gardens were filled with them. And this wasn't just contained within the empire. Diplomats visiting the Ottoman court were often gifted tulip bulbs, these rare, highly prized flowers. This practice directly led to the tulip spreading throughout Europe, eventually culminating in that famous speculative bubble in the Netherlands a century later, tulip mania.
So the Ottoman court was basically setting global fashion trends in flowers.
Essentially, yes. Even in horticulture. Okay, so we've seen the public face the magnificent conqueror, the lawgiver, the patron of arts. Now we need to delve into the private sphere, the intense, often dangerous world of the imperial harem and the court politics. This is where we see major power shifts, leading eventually to what historians call the Sultanate of Women.
And the absolute central figure in that transformation is Hurrem Sultan, known in the West, often rather sensationally, as Roxolana. She didn't just bend the rules, she seemed to break them entirely.
She was a truly revolutionary figure within the Ottoman system. Hurrem wasn't of noble birth. She was captured, likely in Ruthenia, present-day Ukraine, brought to the harem as a slave, and converted to Islam. She was known for her intelligence and apparently her striking red hair. She completely captivated Suleiman, so much so that she became his sole favorite, his Haseki, for his entire reign. This was unusual in itself. Then around 1534, Suleiman did something completely unprecedented. He formally, legally married her. He made his former slave concubine his lawful wife, granting her and her children a status no favorite had held before. She became the first Haseki Sultan.
And the other big tradition she broke was leaving the capital, wasn't it? Normally, the mother of a prince would go with him when he was sent to govern a province.
Exactly. That was the established practice, partly to train the prince, but also to keep potential rivals and their influential mothers away from the center of power. Hurrem refused to follow that path. She remained with Suleiman in the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul right up until her death in 1558. By staying at court, she became the first Ottoman woman to wield consistent, direct political influence at the very heart of the empire. The sources show her advising Suleiman, getting involved in appointments and dismissals, even handling diplomatic correspondence with foreign rulers like the King of Poland. It was a seismic shift in the role of women in Ottoman politics.
And the sources, particularly his poetry, suggest this was a genuine, deep, monogamous love match, which stands in stark contrast to the brutal politics swirling around them.
The evidence for his devotion to Hurrem is pretty compelling. That poem he wrote for her as Muhibi is incredibly passionate and personal. Throne of my lonely niche, my wealth, my love, my moonlight, my most sincere friend, my confidant, my very existence, my sultan, my one and only love. It paints a picture of profound emotional dependence and partnership, quite different from the usual image of a sultan surrounded by countless concubines.
But this intense loyalty to Hurrem has to be set against the fate of his other great confidant, his closest male friend, Bargali Ibrahim Pasha.
Ibrahim's story is the great tragedy of Suleiman's early reign. This was his childhood friend, the Greek slave who rose to become Grand Vizier in 1523, commander-in-chief, given almost unlimited authority, the title Beylerbeyi of Rumelia. He was incredibly powerful.
He was called Nobel the favorite. What went wrong? How did he fall so far so fast?
Well, immense power often breeds arrogance, and Ibrahim certainly accumulated vast wealth and influence, which created enemies. But critically, he seems to have backed the wrong horse in the succession struggle. He was a known supporter of Shahzada Mustafa, Suleiman's eldest surviving son, whose mother was Mahidevran Hatun, not Hurrem. This inevitably put Ibrahim on a collision course with Hurrem Sultan, who was fiercely promoting her own son's claims. Ultimately, though, the decision was Suleiman's. Ibrahim's sheer power may have started to feel like a threat to the Sultan's own absolute authority. There are stories of Ibrahim perhaps overstepping his bounds, using titles implying equality with the Sultan. Suleiman consulted his legal advisors, including Ebu Suud Effendi again. There was a legal complication. Ibrahim often dined with Suleiman, placing him under the Sultan's personal protection. Killing him directly might violate codes of hospitality.
So they found a loophole.
A rather chilling one. The solution was apparently to have Ibrahim killed while Suleiman himself was asleep, thereby technically not breaking the host's protection. In March 1536, assassins strangled Ibrahim in his chambers within the palace. It was a brutal demonstration that, when push came to shove, the perceived needs of dynastic security and the Sultan's absolute power overrode even friendship and, perhaps, the spirit of the lawgiver's own laws.
And Ibrahim's execution was really just the opening act for the much larger, bloodier drama of the succession crisis itself. A grim but seemingly necessary part of the Ottoman system.
Yes, the lack of a clear, fixed rule of succession like primogeniture in Europe meant that every time a sultan died, or even got old, there was a high risk of civil war between his sons. The traditional brutal solution was fratricide. The winning son would eliminate his brothers to secure the throne and prevent instability. Suleiman had, I believe, 8 known sons who lived past infancy. The last decade or so of his long reign became consumed by the question of who would succeed him, leading to the elimination of arguably his most capable heirs.
The most famous and tragic case is that of Shahzadi Mustafa.
Mustafa was the eldest son of Mahidevran, By all accounts, he was very popular, seen as competent, brave, and particularly beloved by the Janissaries, the elite troops. This popularity, ironically, probably sealed his fate. In 1553, during a campaign against Persia, rumors reached Suleiman that Mustafa was plotting to overthrow him, possibly encouraged by the army. These rumors were almost certainly spread or amplified by Hürrem's faction, especially her son-in-law, the new Grand Vizier Rustam Pasha. Suleiman, perhaps paranoid in his later years, summoned Mustafa to his campaign tent in the Ireladi Valley.
A trap.
It seems so. When Mustafa entered the tent, expecting to greet his father, he was ambushed by Suleiman's deaf-mute executioners. The sources say he fought fiercely, but was eventually overpowered and strangled with a bowstring, allegedly within sight of his father. The army was apparently furious, almost mutinied. Rustam Pasha was temporarily dismissed to placate them. Mustafa's execution showed just how ruthless Suleiman could be when he perceived a threat to his throne, even if it meant killing his own popular and capable son.
And the violence didn't end with Mustafa. It led to actual civil war between Hürrem's surviving sons.
That's right. Hürrem had several sons. After Mustafa's death, and the death shortly after of her youngest son, Jahangir, supposedly from grief, the main rivalry was between the remaining two, Selim, later Selim II, and Bayezid. Selim was seen as less capable, but perhaps more pliable. Bayezid was considered more ambitious and perhaps more like his father in temperament. A civil war broke out between their supporters. Selim, with crucial backing from his father, defeated Bayezid near Konya in 1559. Bayezid then made a fateful decision. He fled east with his sons and sought refuge with the Ottomans' great enemy, Shah Tahmasp of Persia.
Putting himself at the mercy of the Safavid Shah, that seems incredibly risky.
Desperate times. But it led to this grim diplomatic endgame. Suleiman demanded the Shah either execute Bayezid or hand him over. Negotiations went back and forth. Finally, in exchange for a huge payment of gold, Shah Tahmasp agreed. However, to maintain a semblance of propriety, the actual execution in 1561 was carried out not by the Persians, but by an Ottoman executioner sent for the purpose. Bayezid and his 4 young sons were all strangled.
Wiping out another whole branch of the dynasty.
Completely. It cleared the path entirely for Selim to succeed his father unchallenged when Suleiman died 5 years later. A brutal conclusion to the family drama.
And fittingly, perhaps, for a ruler whose life was so defined by campaigns, Suleiman the Magnificent died while on his final military expedition, September 6, 1566.
Yes, he was 71 years old, quite an age for the time, and personally leading the army at the siege of Sigidvar in Hungary against the Habsburgs. His death posed an immediate crisis. The Grand Vizier at the time, Sokolu Mehmed Pasha, a very capable statesman, knew that news of the Sultan's death could cause panic in the army and potentially trigger chaos back in the capital before the succession was secured. So he kept Suleiman's death an absolute secret. For 48 days.
48 days? How did they manage that?
Incredible feat of stage management. They pretended he was still alive, issuing orders in his name, even propping up his body, perhaps. This secrecy achieved 2 vital goals. It kept the army's morale from collapsing during the final stages of the siege, which they eventually won. And crucially, it gave his designated heir, Selim II, enough time to travel from his provincial governorship to Istanbul and securely take the throne without rivals emerging. Only then was the death announced. Suleiman's body was brought back to Istanbul for burial in the magnificent Suleimani Mosque complex he had built, although his heart and other organs were buried near the battlefield in Hungary, where a tomb complex later grew up.
So after this incredibly long and impactful reign, how did later generations of Ottomans look back on Suleiman? Was he immediately seen as this unmatchable peak?
Very much so. He became the ultimate benchmark. Later Ottoman writers, particularly those writing in a genre called not know me, basically advice literature, for rulers absolutely idealized Suleiman's reign. They depicted his era as the perfect golden age of justice, order, and strength. And they used this idealized image of Suleiman's time to criticize what they saw as the shortcomings and changes of later periods, often framing subsequent history as a story of inevitable decline from that perfect standard.
But modern historians have pushed back against that simple decline narrative, haven't they?
Yes, that's a really important point. Scholarship, especially over the last few decades, since the 1980s really, has largely rejected that simplistic idea that the Ottoman Empire just went into terminal decline immediately after Suleiman. Instead, historians now tend to view the centuries after Suleiman not as decline, but as an era of transformation. The argument is that the empire, often using the very administrative and legal structures Suleiman had solidified, proved remarkably resilient and adaptable. It faced new challenges changing global economies, new military technologies, and transformed itself to survive and continue functioning as a major power for centuries longer, just differently.
His reputation certainly extended far beyond the Ottoman borders. His military power was recognized everywhere.
Oh, globally. His name was known from England to India. It's fascinating that even Shakespeare, writing in England decades later, mentions Sultan Suleiman in The Merchant of Venice as a byword for military might. And Suleiman himself was keenly aware of this global status and articulated it very clearly.
We have that incredible inscription he commissioned in Bender, Moldova around 1537. It really lays out his view of himself.
It's probably the most powerful statement of his imperial ambition. He declares, "I am God's slave and sultan of this world. In Baghdad I am the Shah, in Byzantine realms the Caesar, and in Egypt the Sultan, who sends his fleets to the seas of Europe, the Maghreb, and India." There's absolutely no ambiguity there. He saw himself as the supreme sovereign, the heir to multiple empires, ruling across continents and oceans, the dominant figure on the world stage.
And perhaps the most surprising legacy is how the lawgiver aspect is remembered, even in the West, in a place you might not expect.
It's truly remarkable. In the chamber of the U.S. House of Representatives in the Capitol building in Washington, D.C., there are marble relief portraits honoring historical figures considered foundational to law and governance. And among figures like Moses, Solon, and Jefferson, there is a portrait of Suleiman the Magnificent. He's honored there not primarily as the conqueror, but specifically as a great lawgiver, someone who established principles of justice and administration. So in the end, his legacy as Kanunini, the lawgiver, seems to have resonated just as strongly, perhaps even more enduringly in some ways, than his fearsome reputation as Muhtasham Suleiman the Magnificent.
So that brings our deep dive into Suleiman I to a close. We've traced his path from a young governor inheriting immense potential through his transformation into a world-shaping conqueror, a meticulous lawgiver whose codes lasted centuries, a lavish patron of a golden age, all while navigating the incredibly intense and ultimately tragic dynamics of his own family and court.
What really emerges, I think, is how much the success of this era depended not just on Suleiman himself, though he was clearly exceptional, but also on the incredibly talented people he gathered around him and knew how to utilize. Think of the legal mind of Ebu Suud Effendi, the early military and administrative genius of Ibrahim Pasha, the later administrative skills of Rustem Pasha, the sheer architectural brilliance of Mimar Sinan. Suleiman's genius lay partly in identifying, promoting, and directing this talent, and perhaps chillingly, also knowing when to eliminate it if it became a perceived threat.
So, to leave you with something to think about as you go about your day, we call him the lawgiver, Kanuni, because he created this vast, relatively impartial system of public law, the Kanun, that brought order and predictability to millions and endured for hundreds of years. Yet the end of his reign was marked by the highly personal, arguably arbitrary, and definitely brutal executions of his oldest friend, Ibrahim, and his most promising sons, Mustafa and Bayezid. So the question to ponder is, how does a ruler, any ruler, reconcile the demands of creating lasting, impartial public law with the ruthless, often extra-legal necessities of maintaining personal power, ensuring dynastic survival, and guaranteeing the stability of the state itself? Where does the lawgiver end and the absolute monarch begin?
Welcome to the Deep Dive, your essential shortcut to knowing exactly what matters in the world of groundbreaking science and discovery. Today, we're really opening the door on a field of chemistry that's fundamentally rewriting the rules. We're talking materials science.
Yes, specifically molecular architecture. It sounds fancy, but it's about building materials molecule by molecule.
And the results are, well, pretty astonishing. Imagine materials that can pull drinking water right out of thin desert air.
Or store really explosive gases like hydrogen safely at, normal pressures.
Or even clean up those toxic forever chemicals, the PFAS stuff, from our water much more effectively than before.
It's a huge shift. For years, chemists looking for a material for a specific job, filtering, catalysis, whatever, they'd search nature or use existing synthetic stuff, often rigid, sometimes unpredictable.
Right, sort of hoping to find the right tool.
Exactly. But now, chemists are becoming the architects. They're designing these materials from scratch, literally piece by piece, creating these tiny, incredibly organized, molecular rooms, you could call them.
Molecular rooms. I like that. Tailor-made for a specific chemical job.
Precisely. Whether it's a reaction or just storing something.
And that massive change in approach, from just finding stuff to actually engineering it. That's why we're here today, because the big news just dropped. The Nobel Prize in Chemistry for 2025, it's been jointly awarded to three pioneers, Susumu Kitagawa, Richard Robson, and Omar M. Yaki.
And the award citation says it perfectly, for the development of metal organic frameworks.
Metal Organic Frameworks.
Yeah.
MOFs. You're going to hear that acronym a lot.
You are. So what are they? Think crystalline structures. But the key thing is, these crystals aren't solid blocks. They're full of vast, organized, repeating holes or pores.
Like a scaffold.
Exactly like a molecular scaffold, built from metal bits acting as, say, cornerstones and organic molecules acting as the struts linking them together.
Okay.
It gives chemists this incredible level of control over matter. We're talking materials with internal surface areas and chemical properties that just, well, they weren't really conceivable before MOFs came along.
Okay, so let's unpack this properly. Our mission for this deep dive is to explore the history, the thinking behind it, and the really quite amazing future of these MOFs.
We'll trace the journey. It starts, believe it or not, with something like wooden models in a classroom.
Seriously?
Yeah. And ends up with materials many are calling the defining materials of the 21st century.
So we'll see how these three laureates, Kitagawa, Robson, Yagi, how they took a really clever idea that didn't quite work initially.
Right, the stability problem.
And turned it into something real, something practical. And crucially, what this breakthrough means for tackling huge global challenges: climate change, energy, water.
It touches all of those. It's a fundamental new tool in the chemist's toolbox.
Right. Let's start with the basics then. Building materials. You need the plan, the components. What are the absolute essential pieces of a metal organic framework?
Okay, it breaks down nicely, just like the name suggests. You've got the metal part. These are usually metal ions, think zinc, copper, cobalt, acting as the nodes, the corners of the structure.
Got it. Metal corners.
And then you have the organic part. These are generally longer molecules based on carbon. They act as the rigid linkers, the struts connecting those metal corners.
Little nodes, organic struts.
Exactly. And when you get them to link up in the right way, they form this highly porous, very regular crystalline structure, like a repeating cage almost.
And the person who first really saw the potential of using these two parts to create that kind of geometric order, that was Richard Robson, right? Way back in the 70s.
That's right, Richard Robson. And his eureka moment is just a fantastic story. It happened in 1974 purely by chance, almost.
Accidental genius.
Pretty much. He was teaching at the University of Melbourne. And he wasn't setting out to invent some revolutionary material. He was just getting stuff ready for a standard chemistry lesson.
What was he doing?
He needed models, you know, the old ball and stick models of molecules. He asked the university workshop to drill holes into wooden balls, the atoms, so he could stick in wooden rods, the chemical bonds, to show students molecular shapes.
Ah, okay. I remember those from school. But you can't just drill holes anywhere, can you? Atoms have specific ways they connect.
Precisely. That's the whole point of the models. Each atom type forms bonds in a very specific geometry. Carbon likes 4 bonds in a sort of pyramid, a tetrahedron.
Right.
So Robson had to carefully mark out exactly where the holes needed to be drilled on each atom ball to respect that fixed geometry.
Makes sense.
But then, as he started putting the models together, sticking the rods into the pre-drill holes, bang, the insight hit him.
What does it?
He saw that the finished models, these complex 3D molecules, they just automatically form the correct structure. Why? Because the fixed positions of the holes dictated the overall geometry. The rules were built in.
Okay, that's neat for a model, but what made that jump from a teaching aid to a potential revolution in making actual materials? Surely people knew about molecular geometry.
Well, absolutely. But applying it to designing large, complex, predictable structures, that was different. Chemistry back then, especially synthesis, was often, well, messy.
Eat it and hope.
Kind of. You'd mix things, apply energy, and often get a mixture of products, impurities. It wasn't always well ordered. Robson realized he could take that principle from the wooden balls, the fixed geometry, and scale it up.
How?
Not just linking individual atoms, but linking together pre-designed larger molecular units, whole building blocks with their own inherent rigid geometry.
Ah, so using the shape of the pieces to control the shape of the whole construction.
Exactly. If your building blocks are rigid and have fixed connection points, the overall structure has to follow that predefined pattern. It was about imposing order through design.
Instead of the usual chemical chaos, the bird's nest, as you called it.
Precisely. And he finally got around to testing this idea properly much later in 1989. He needed a model structure known for perfect order. He chose diamond.
Diamond, the ultimate example of rigid, ordered structure. Carbon atoms perfectly locked together.
Right. Each carbon bonded to 4 others, tetrahedrally. Perfect repeating pattern, very compact. Robson wanted to mimic that pattern, but using his new, bigger building blocks.
So what did he use instead of carbon?
For the cornerstones, the nodes, he used positively charged copper ions, specifically Tex2 plus $. Like carbon, these copper ions naturally prefer to be surrounded by 4 neighbors, a tetrahedral coordination.
Okay, so copper ions, the corners. What are the links, the struts?
He needed something with 4 arms to connect to the 4 points around the copper. He chose a specific 4-armed organic molecule. Each arm ended with a chemical group called a nitrile.
And nitriles like copper.
They have a strong, specific attraction to those Tex2 plus ioners, so the geometry matched perfectly. A 4-point node, copper, and a 4-armed linker, the organic molecule. Everything designed to fit.
It sounds so logical. But you said most chemists still expected it to fail, to just make a mess. Why?
Because getting such relatively large, bulky molecules to neatly assemble into a perfect crystal, it usually doesn't happen. Normally, thermal motion, solvent effects, competing reactions, they just overwhelm the subtle geometric instructions. You'd expect a random powder, an amorphous gunk.
But it worked.
It worked beautifully. Because the geometric matching was so precise, the copper ions and the linkers effectively found each other and locked into place. They self-assemble into a regular crystalline lattice, just like Robson predicted.
Okay, so he made a crystal based on the diamond structure, but what was the big deal? What made it different?
The space. That was the crucial, groundbreaking difference. A real diamond is incredibly dense, almost no empty space inside. Robson's crystal, however, it was mostly empty space. It contained this vast network of large, repeating cavities or pores running throughout the entire structure.
Like a diamond framework, but hollow.
Essentially, yes. A diamond made mostly of air, held together by this precise molecular architecture. That was the world's first real metal organic framework, a MOF.
And did he show it could do anything?
He did, quite quickly. He showed that small molecules and ions could move in and out of these cavities. He demonstrated ion exchange, for instance. He immediately saw the potential, talking about catalysis, new materials with properties never seen before.
But there was a catch, wasn't there? The reason it didn't take off immediately.
The big catch, stability. His initial constructions were, well, the term used was quite rickety.
Rickety.
Yeah. When he tried to empty out the cavities, remove the solvent liquid that was present during the synthesis, which kind of propped the structure up.
It collapsed.
Often, yes. The framework would just fall apart. Imagine building a beautiful, intricate sandcastle. Looks great when it's wet, but when it dries, poof.
Right. Not very useful if it disintegrates the moment you try to use its empty space. So the scientific community, they weren't convinced.
Largely, no. It was seen by many as this elegant, intellectually interesting curiosity, but ultimately useless for practical applications. A beautiful failure, in a way.
So he'd laid the conceptual groundwork, the blueprint, but the materials themselves weren't robust enough?
Exactly. And that lack of stability meant the field kind of stalled for about a decade. People needed MOFs that could stand up on their own, empty and ready for use. That was the challenge left for the next generation of innovators.
And this is where, as you said, it gets really interesting. Robson gave us the vision, the proof of concept. You could design these incredibly porous structures, but making them stable, making them dynamically useful. That took the parallel, sometimes overlapping, but distinct breakthroughs from Susumu Kitagawa and Omar Yagi.
Okay, let's tackle Kitagawa first. Working in Japan through the 90s, and apparently he had this really interesting philosophy driving his work. Something about the usefulness of useless.
Yes, that's a recurring theme in his story. It's inspired by the ancient Chinese philosophers Wangzi. The idea is to look beyond immediate, obvious utility and find value in things that might seem pointless or flawed at first glance.
Which must have been handy, because wasn't he facing the same skepticism Robson did? His early MOFs weren't exactly world beaters either. Not at all. His initial efforts, around 1992, also used copper ions, like Robson. He created a two-dimensional material that could trap acetone molecules, which was, interesting.
Yeah.
But it wasn't particularly stable and didn't have a clear, compelling purpose. It certainly wasn't enough to convince funding agencies.
Right. It must take incredible persistence to keep pushing in a field when everyone, especially the people holding the purse strings, is telling you it's a dead end. because the materials literally fall apart.
Immense persistence. His grant applications kept getting rejected. The feedback was consistent, too unstable, no clear application. But Kitagawa was convinced there was something profound there. He just needed to find the right building block.
He needed stronger connections, better molecular glue.
Essentially, yes. He realized the copper ions Robson and he himself had used might not be forming strong enough or perhaps geometrically suitable enough bonds to create robust, three-dimensional frameworks that could survive without the solvent.
So what was the breakthrough moment for him around 1997?
It was. His group made a crucial switch. They moved away from copper and started using different metal ions: cobalt, nickel, or zinc.
Why those metals?
These metals, when combined with a specific organic linker molecule called 4-bol-4-bipyridine, formed genuinely stable, three-dimensional structures. The combination of these metals and this linker created bonds that were strong enough and arranged in the right way to hold the framework together even after the solvent was removed.
They didn't collapse when dry.
They didn't collapse. This was huge. They created stable 3D MOFs with open channels running through them. And crucially, they showed these empty, stable frameworks could do exactly what was hoped. They could absorb gases.
What kind of gases?
Common industrial gases, methane, nitrogen, oxygen. They showed the MOFs could take them up, hold them, and then release them over and over again without the structure changing shape or degrading. This was the proof of stability and function that the field desperately needed.
Okay, problem solved. Stable MOFs achieved.
Stability, yes. Function, yes. But Kitagawa realized there was another hurdle. He needed to clearly define why these new MOFs were special. Why weren't they just, fancier versions of existing porous materials?
Like zeolites, I've heard of those. They're used in industry, right, for filtering and stuff.
Exactly. Zeolites were, and still are, incredibly important industrial materials. They're made from silicon dioxide. They're very stable, very porous, great at absorbing gases. So the question was, what makes MOFs better, or at least significantly different? If they're just another rigid sponge, why bother?
Good point.
Yeah.
What was Kitagawa's answer? What made MOFs unique in his view?
He articulated this really clearly around 1998. The key difference, he argued, boils down to customizability and functionality.
How so?
Zeolites are essentially fixed structures dictated by their inorganic chemistry. There's a limited range. MOFs, on the other hand, because you construct them from metal nodes and organic linkers, you have a potentially enormous library of organic molecules to choose from.
Thousands of different possible linkers.
Tens of thousands, even more now. This means you can rationally design the MOF. You can tune the size of the pores. You can change the chemical environment inside the pores by adding different functional groups to the linkers. You can build in specific properties.
So zeolites are like standard off-the-shelf components, but MOFs are like custom-designed, precision-engineered tools.
That's a great analogy. But Kitagawa took it even further. He introduced a truly revolutionary concept about the nature of MOFs themselves. He proposed they could be soft materials.
Hang on. Soft. We're talking about crystals. Crystals are the definition of hard, rigid things. How can a crystal be soft?
Right, it sounds contradictory. But what Kitagawa realized and demonstrated was that unlike the completely rigid framework of zeolites, you could intentionally build MOFs using certain flexible organic linkers, or design them so there were weak cooperative interactions within the structure.
And what does that flexibility allow?
It allows the MOF to change its shape in response to external stimuli. He showed that some MOFs could dynamically open or close their pores when guest molecules like gases entered or left.
Whoa. He famously described this behavior as being somewhat like a lung that can breathe gas in and out, changeable but stable. A molecular lung. That's a powerful image. So it's not just a static container, it's dynamic, it responds.
Exactly. It moves MOFs beyond just simple storage into the realm of dynamic function. Think sensing, or highly selective separation, where the material adapts to grab only one type of molecule. He introduced the idea that these materials weren't just structures, they were potentially responsive systems.
Okay, that's a massive conceptual leap, flexibility and responsiveness.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, across the globe, Omar Yaghi was taking a different but equally important path, wasn't he? More focus on pushing the boundaries of rigid structure and rational design.
That's right, Omar Yaghi. His story is also quite remarkable. His background, growing up in Amman, Jordan, facing significant challenges.
Yeah, the notes mentioned quite difficult circumstances, a single room, no electricity or water at times.
It really highlights his incredible drive and determination. His fascination with chemistry apparently sparked really early, around age 10. The story goes he snuck into a locked school library, found chemistry books, and was just captivated by the diagrams of perfect ordered molecular structures.
That image of perfect order must have contrasted sharply with his surroundings, and maybe even with how chemistry was often done in practice.
That seems to be a key motivation for him. He saw traditional chemistry, the heat and mix approach, as inherently chaotic, often leading to impure products, unwanted side reactions. He craved control, precision.
He wanted rational design.
Exactly. He wanted to be able to design a structure on paper, choose the exact chemical building blocks like snapping together pieces of Lego, as he put it, and know that the final product would be precisely what he intended. Clean, ordered, predictable.
And he started making progress on this in the mid-90s, building structures and, crucially, giving the field its name.
Yes. By 1995, his group was successfully linking metal ions and organic molecules, initially creating these two-dimensional net-like structures that used copper and also cobalt.
And the cobalt one was particularly good.
It was. It showed really impressive thermal stability. It could handle temperatures up to 350 degrees Celsius without decomposing, which was very high for these kinds of materials back then. And it could host guest molecules within its structure.
And this is where the name came from.
Correct. In the paper describing these findings, Yagi and his team formally coined the term that stuck, Metal Organic Framework, MOF.
So he named the field and demonstrated high stability. But the one MOF that really became the poster child, the one that made everyone sit up and take notice, that was the MOF5, right? Around 1999.
MOF5.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's considered a classic for a reason. It combined exceptional stability with unprecedented spaciousness.
How stable was it?
When empty, it could handle temperatures up to 300 degrees Celsius. This was the kind of robustness Robson had dreamed of but couldn't achieve. This proved MOFs could be seriously durable.
But it was the space inside that really blew people away.
Oh, yeah. The statistic that made researchers, as the Nobel release puts it, raise their eyebrows. That was the internal surface area.
Let's hear it again. The football pitch analogy.
It's just astounding. Take just a couple of grams of MOF5 powder, like you said, maybe a few sugar cubes worth. If you could somehow unfold all the internal surfaces within that tiny amount of material, the total area would be as big as a football pitch.
Wow. A football pitch inside a sugar cube. That's hard to even visualize.
It is, and that number just dwarfed the capacity of existing materials like zeolites. It showed that MOFs weren't just a novelty, they offered a fundamentally different scale of porosity, an enormous internal surface packed into a tiny volume.
Why is that huge internal surface area so important?
Because that's where the action happens. For storing gases, filtering liquids, or catalyzing reactions, you need surfaces for molecules to stick to or interact with. More surface area means vastly higher capacity.
Right, more parking spots for molecules inside the MOF.
Exactly. Yagi's MOF5 was like building a multi-story car park with incredibly thin floors and walls, maximizing the parking space relative to the building materials.
So we have these two major threads. Kitagawa focusing on stability plus flexibility, the breathing MOFs.
Right, for dynamic functions, selectivity, responsiveness.
And Yagi pushing for maximum rigid stability and sheer storage capacity, exemplified by MOF5. Are these competing ideas?
Not really competing, more like complementary. They demonstrate the incredible versatility of the MOF platform itself. It showed you could tailor the design for different needs.
So if you need massive gas storage, you want Yagi's rigid high surface area approach.
Precisely. For storing methane for vehicles, for example, you want maximum capacity and stability. You don't necessarily want the container changing shape. MOF5 set the benchmark for that.
But if you need selective separation or sensing, maybe Kitagawa's flexible MOFs are the way to go.
Exactly. The lung-like MOFs are better suited for tasks where the material needs to actively respond or adapt to its environment. It showed the breadth of what MOF design could achieve.
And Yagi really cemented this idea of MOFs as an engineering platform in the early 2000s, didn't he? Showing you could systematically modify them.
Absolutely. That was a final piece of the foundational puzzle. Around 2002-2003, he demonstrated the power of rational modification. He didn't just make MOF5, he made a whole family of related MOFs.
Oh.
By systematically changing the organic linker molecules, he used linkers of slightly different lengths. By doing this, he could precisely tune the size of the cavities inside the MOS structure.
Like choosing different length Lego bricks to build different sized rooms.
Perfect analogy.
Yeah.
He created 16 distinct variants of MOF5, each with slightly different pore sizes.
Yeah.
This allowed him to optimize the MOFs for specific tasks, like finding the ideal pore size for storing the maximum amount of methane gas for natural gas vehicles.
So it wasn't just one lucky discovery. It was proof that chemists could now sit down, design a MOF with specific properties on paper, choose the right building blocks, and actually synthesize it. They were truly becoming molecular architects.
That's exactly it. The combined work of Robson, Kitagawa, and Yagi provided the blueprint, the stable materials, the diverse functionalities, and the rational design principles. They built the foundation for an entire new field of chemistry.
So let's bring this into the present and future. We have Robson's initial vision, Kitagawa's stability and dynamic flexibility, Yagi's rational design and massive capacity. What does this toolbox actually let us do? You mentioned tens of thousands of MOFs exist now. Where are we seeing the impact?
The impact is starting to become very real, moving from academic labs into potential and, in some cases, actual commercial applications. And a huge focus, understandably, is on environmental solutions and resource management.
Okay, like the water harvesting example. That sounds almost like science fiction. MOF 303 from Yagi's group, pulling water from desert air in Arizona.
It sounds incredible, but it works. It leverages the MOF's ability to selectively absorb molecules. MOF 303 has internal surfaces that are chemically tuned to grab onto water molecules, even when there aren't many around, like in very low humidity air, below 20% sometimes.
So it just sucks the water vapor out of the air?
Essentially, yes. It acts like a super sponge for water. It typically does this overnight when temperatures are cooler. The MOF holds onto the water tightly.
And then how do you get the water back out to drink? Squeeze the MOF.
Not quite. The elegance is in the release. It's designed for low energy input. When the sun comes up and heats the material.
Solar power.
Exactly. The warmth provides just enough energy for the MOF to release the trapped water, but now as liquid potable water. It's a passive capture and release cycle driven by natural temperature swings.
Wow. So you could potentially have devices working off-grid in arid regions, just making water out of the air using sunlight.
That's the vision, and the prototypes have shown it's feasible.
Yeah.
Decentralized water production where pipelines or wells aren't an option, it's potentially transformative.
Absolutely. Okay, beyond harvesting resources, what about cleaning up messes? Environmental remediation. You mentioned PFAS, the forever chemicals.
Yes, PFAS are a huge problem. They're in so many products they don't break down easily, and they contaminate water sources worldwide. Removing them efficiently is tough.
And MOFs offer a better way. How?
Two main advantages: selectivity and capacity. A MOF, like UIO67 for example, can be designed with pores that are just the right size and have the right chemical stickiness to selectively grab PFAS molecules out of water, even when they're present at very low concentrations.
Better targeting than, say, standard carbon filters.
Often, yes. And remember that massive surface area. That means they have a much higher capacity to hold on to the pollutants before needing regeneration or replacement. A small amount of MOF can clean a lot of water.
Can they also destroy the pollutants, not just trap them?
Some can, yes. That's another exciting area. MOFs can be designed not just as sponges, but as catalysts.
Catalysts, meaning they speed up chemical reactions.
Exactly. So a MOF, like MLO 101, which has these enormous internal cavities, can incorporate catalytically active sites. It's been used to help break down stubborn pollutants like components of crude oil spills or even trace antibiotics found in wastewater.
So instead of just collecting the waste, the MOF helps destroy it.
That's the goal. Turning harmful chemicals into simpler, less harmful substances, it could make water treatment much more efficient and sustainable.
Okay, shifting to energy and climate change. Carbon capture is obviously a massive priority. How do MOFs fit in there?
They're extremely promising. The challenge with carbon capture, say from a factory smokestack, is selectively grabbing the carbon dioxide while ignoring all the nitrogen gas, which makes up most of the exhaust.
You need a tech CO2-specific filter.
Precisely. And MOFs can be designed for that kind of selectivity. CALF20 is a great example. It's engineered with pore sizes and surface chemistry optimized to preferentially absorb tech CO2.
And is this actually being tested at scale?
It is. CALF20 is undergoing trials right now at an industrial facility in Canada. The hope is that its high capacity and selectivity will make direct capture of text CO2 from emissions sources much more economically viable. It's a direct tool to fight greenhouse gas emissions.
What about the other side of the energy coin, clean fuels? Hydrogen comes up all the time, but storing it is a major headache. It's explosive under high pressure.
It's a huge bottleneck for the hydrogen economy. Storing hydrogen gas safely and densely requires very strong, heavy, expensive high-pressure tanks. That's a barrier for vehicles, for example.
Can MOFs help here? Do they avoid the high pressure?
That's the key advantage. MOFs offer a way to store hydrogen at much lower, safer pressures closer to normal atmospheric pressure, or maybe slightly elevated.
How? Where does the hydrogen go?
It doesn't rely on squeezing the gas molecules together with brute force. Instead, the hydrogen molecules stick to the vast internal surfaces inside the MOF, pours through relatively weak physical absorption forces. Think of it as lining the walls of those molecular rooms with hydrogen.
So the MOF acts like a sponge, soaking up hydrogen at low pressure. A material like Nu-1501 does this.
Exactly. Nu-1501 is one of the leading materials optimized for this. It can store significant amounts of hydrogen at near ambient pressures and release it readily when needed.
Okay, but here's the crucial question. Can it store enough hydrogen? How does the density compare to those high-pressure tanks, even if it's safer?
That's the critical trade-off and the focus of intense research. Historically, MOFs stored less hydrogen by volume than the best high-pressure tanks. But materials like Nu-1501 are really closing that gap. They're getting much better.
So maybe not quite as much hydrogen packed in, but way safer and cheaper.
That's often the calculation. The massive improvement in safety, avoiding dangerously high pressures, and the potential reduction in tank weight and cost could make hydrogen vehicles or other applications like renewable natural gas, RNG vehicles that might use MOFs for methane storage much more practical for widespread use. It de-risks the whole system.
Makes sense. Safety is paramount. Beyond these huge climate and energy applications, are MOFs finding uses in other industries?
They are. Their ability to handle tricky gases is valuable. The semiconductor industry, for example, uses some extremely toxic gases in manufacturing microchips.
Right. Handling those must be a nightmare.
MOFs are being used as highly effective filters or scrubbers to capture these toxic gases, or even as safe storage containers for them, significantly improving safety in these high-tech facilities.
What about defense applications? Chemical weapons?
Yes, that's another area. Researchers have designed MOFs that don't just absorb harmful chemical agents, but actively break them down. The MOF structure can incorporate catalytic sites that rapidly decompose nerve agents or other chemical weapons upon contact.
Like a self-detoxifying filter material.
Something like that. A critical technology for protective gear or decontamination systems.
And you mentioned earlier, they can even keep fruit fresh longer.
Yes. On a less dramatic note, some MOFs are very good at trapping ethylene gas.
The stuff that makes fruit ripen.
Exactly. So, incorporating these MOFs into food packaging could potentially slow down the ripening process and reduce food spoilage.
Fascinatingly diverse applications.
Yeah.
And what about medicine? We touched on the soft MOFs. Could they deliver drugs inside the body?
That's a really exciting frontier, linking back to Kitagawa's flexible MOFs and Yagi's precise structural control. The idea is to load drug molecules inside the MOF's pores.
Like cargo containers.
Exactly. Then you design the MOF so it only releases its cargo under specific conditions found where the drug is needed, maybe the specific pH level inside a tumor, or triggered by temperature or light.
Targeted delivery. So the drug goes right where it's needed, minimizing side effects elsewhere.
That's the promise. More effective treatments with fewer side effects. It's still in development, but the potential is enormous.
It really seems like from water and energy to medicine and manufacturing, these MOFs are popping up everywhere. Is it fair to say they're moving towards being a major industrial material?
I think that's definitely the direction of travel. Major chemical companies are investing significantly now in scaling up production and developing commercial applications. They're using both the rational design principles from Yagi and Kitagawa, and now even AI and machine learning to discover and optimize new MOFs even faster.
So the material of the 21st century prediction might not be hyperbole.
It might not be. The ability to design materials with this level of precision and functionality is truly a paradigm shift.
The work of these three laureates hasn't just given us new substances, it's given chemistry a whole new way of thinking about building matter.
Absolutely. It aligns perfectly with Alfred Nobel's intent, conferring the greatest benefit on humankind. They've given chemists the tools, this molecular architecture, to start tackling some of our most difficult and long-standing problems in fundamentally new ways.
This has been an absolutely fascinating deep dive. Let's try and quickly synthesize the key contributions before we wrap up. We started with Richard Robson.
Right. Robson provided the initial spark, the proof of concept. He showed you could build these vast, ordered, porous crystals using metal corners and organic links, the blueprint, but...
But they were unstable, rickety.
Exactly. Then came Susumu Kitagawa. He solved the stability problem, finding the right metal linker combinations. He demonstrated they could actually absorb and release gases without falling apart.
And crucially, he introduced the idea of flexibility.
Yes, the revolutionary concept of soft MOFs, materials that could change shape, act like a lung, enabling dynamic functions and selectivity, a whole new dimension.
And finally, Omar Yagi.
Yagi gave the field its name, MOF. He pushed stability and rational design to the limit, creating the ultra-stable, incredibly spacious MOF5.
The football pitch in a sugar cube.
That one. Proving the immense capacity possible. And he demonstrated the power of systematic modification, showing chemists could truly engineer these materials for specific tasks. The complete toolkit.
Blueprint, stability, flexibility, capacity, and engineering control. All essential pieces.
Their combined insights really did launch a new era in materials chemistry.
Okay, for our final thought. We talked quite a bit about Kitagawa's concept of MOFs acting like a flexible lung, breathing gases in and out, changing shape based on what's inside. That idea of a material dynamically responding to its molecular environment is powerful.
It really bridges the gap between static materials and dynamic systems.
So here's something for you, our listeners, to think about. If we can now build materials that mimic a biological function, like breathing absorption, response, release, what comes next, what other complex biological functions could molecular architects eventually translate into stable, human-made materials?
Could we see materials that, say, repair themselves when damaged, like skin? Or materials that actively regulate temperature, like biological organisms do?
Or even materials capable of basic information processing, responding to sequences of chemical inputs. How far can we push this biomimicry using molecular architecture? Where does the line between a smart material and something resembling a living system begin to blur?
It's a fascinating question about the future possibilities opened up by these architects of molecular rooms.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're setting sail on a pretty intense journey. We're talking desperation, debt, storms, and ultimately, salvation.
That's right. We are diving deep into Richard Wagner's Der Fliegende Holländer.
The Flying Dutchman, and for those keeping track, that's WWV 63 in the catalog, a really key early work.
Absolutely key, because this is where Wagner really starts to zero in on that massive theme that defines so much of his later work. Redemption. Redemption through love, specifically.
And it's not just any love, is it? It's absolute total commitment.
Exactly. And that's why, it's the earliest opera you'll regularly see at the Bayreuth Festival. This is where the mature Wagner, the one we think of, really begins.
Okay, so that's our mission for you today. We want to unpack the sheer chaos that birthed this opera. Financial chaos, creative desperation.
We'll look at the real-life events, the storms Wagner actually went through.
And how the story itself changed, right? From satire to something deadly serious.
Yeah, a huge shift. Plus, we'll get into the music, the structure, things like the leitmotifs starting to take shape.
And we've got some fascinating details lined up. We're tracing this from a literal storm at sea.
A terrifying one, by all accounts.
To its source in a satirical novel by Heine, which is kind of surprising.
It really is, and we'll touch on that original structure, too, the idea of performing it all in one go, no breaks.
Okay, let's dive in. To really get The Flying Dutchman, you have to understand Wagner's life just before he wrote it. It wasn't posed in comfort, was it?
Not at all. It was born from crisis, pure and simple. We need to go back to early 1839. Wagner's young, just 26.
And he's got a decent job, right? Conductor at the Court Theater in Riga.
He does, but the sources are really clear. He was living way beyond his means. An extravagant lifestyle, they call it.
And his wife, Minna Planer, she was an actress?
Yes, but she'd retired. So the income dropped, but Wagner's spending, well, it didn't.
So massive debt started piling up, unpayable debts.
Exactly. And the creditors were closing in. He was basically cornered.
So his big plan wasn't to, sort things out financially. It was to run.
Run and aim high. He wanted to get his big opera Rienzi staged in Paris. That was the dream. Escape the debts and achieve fame in the opera capital of the world.
But running wasn't easy. The authorities were onto him because of the debt.
They were. They actually seized his passport. So getting out of Riga meant an illegal border crossing.
Wow. Just him and Minna.
Just the two of them making this incredibly dangerous crossing over the Prussian border. And it was rough. Really rough.
The sources mention something terrible happened during that crossing.
They do. Minna suffered a miscarriage. You have to imagine the stress, the fear, fleeing creditors, sneaking across a border, and then that physical trauma on top of it all.
That level of desperation, it must seep into the art, mustn't it?
How could it not? And the danger wasn't over. They'd crossed the border, but they still needed to get to Paris, ideally via London.
So a sea journey was next.
Yes. They managed to get passage on a ship called the Thetis. Apparently, the captain took pity on them, or maybe just took the risk, even though they had no passports.
And this was supposed to be a fairly quick trip.
Supposed to be. About 8 days to London. That was the plan.
But reality had other ideas.
Big time. The North Sea had other ideas. They sailed into ferocious storms, high seas, constant danger. The journey stretched from 8 days to 3 weeks.
3 weeks on a storm-tossed ship, fleeing debt.
And at one point, they were forced to take shelter in the Norwegian fjords at a place called Tvedestrand. Just imagine the isolation, the sound of the waves, the wind.
And Wagner himself said this experience was the direct inspiration.
He did. Later in his autobiography, Mein Leben, he points right back to this 1839 voyage. He said the trip through the Norwegian reefs, the whole experience, gave the Flying Dutchman legend its distinctive, strange coloring.
You can almost hear it in the overture, can't you? That raw power of the sea.
Absolutely. It's not just music about a storm. It feels like music born from a storm.
So after all that physical danger, escaping creditors, the terrifying sea journey, they finally get to Paris. And things start looking up.
No. Not even close. Paris was, frankly, a disaster for them.
Really, after all that?
He couldn't get conducting work. The Paris Opera, the pinnacle he was aiming for, flat out rejected Rienzi.
Ouch.
Yeah. So they were broke, utterly broke, living in poverty, relying on friends, Wagner scraping by, writing articles, even copying scores for other composers.
Copying scores. That must have stung his pride.
Immensely. And it's right in this low point, this period of total failure and humiliation, that the idea for the Flying Dutchman starts to take shape. But not as a grand artistic statement initially.
So?
More like a desperate attempt to make some money, any money.
Okay.
He came up with the idea of a short, one-act opera based on the Dutchman legend. His hope was maybe the opera would stage it as a curtain raiser, something performed before a ballet.
A bit of a step down from getting Rienzi's staged.
A huge step down. And here's the kicker. He actually wrote up a prose version, like a detailed plot summary or scenario.
But he tried to sell that.
He did. He sold the scenario to the director of the opera, a man named Léon Pillet, for 500 francs. A tiny sum, really, but they needed it.
So Pillet bought the story.
He bought the story. But, and this is crucial, he did not buy Wagner's music for it. Wagner couldn't convince him the score was any good.
Wow. So this establishment just dismissed his musical ideas.
Completely. Pillet saw a usable plot, which, ironically, he later gave to another composer, Pierre-Louis Deitch, who wrote his own opera called Le Vaisseau Fantôme.
Based on Wagner's scenario.
Apparently so, though reports say the similarity isn't huge, but think about that rejection. Wagner sells the story, but they basically say, thanks, but no thanks to your music. For a composer like Wagner, that rejection must have been fuel.
Fuel for the fire. I'll show him.
Exactly. It confirms his view that the establishment doesn't get it, that he needs to forge his own path, create something they can't ignore. That failure is, in a way, the launch pad for the real Flying Dutchman.
Okay, that makes sense. So that humiliation becomes a turning point. Let's shift from his physical flight to the literary flight, the sources. He didn't invent the legend itself.
No, the Flying Dutchman legend was already around. Wagner specifically acknowledged his main source was a retelling by the German writer Heinrich Heine.
Heine? Wasn't he more known for irony and satire?
Very much so. The story appeared in Heine's 1833 satirical novel, The Memoirs of Mr. von Schnabelowopski.
A satirical novel? That seems like an odd place to find the basis for such a serious, intense opera.
It is, and that's the core of Wagner's transformation. He took Heine's story, which was written with a specific ironic distance, and flipped it completely.
How did Heine tell it?
In Heine's book, the narrator describes watching a fictional play about the Dutchman. Heine presents the captain, almost cynically calls him a wandering Jew of the ocean. And Heine did introduce the key plot point. The idea that the Dutchman could be redeemed by finding a woman who would be faithful to him until death.
Ah, so that part comes from Heine.
It does. But, and this is the crucial difference, Heine used it for ironic humor. He was poking fun at the over-the-top romantic ideals of the time. The idea of this eternally damned captain being saved by some perfectly faithful woman was meant to seem kind of absurd, a commentary on sentimentalism.
So Heine was mocking the very idea Wagner took completely seriously.
Precisely. Wagner read Heine's satirical take and stripped away all the irony. He took the redemption theme literally, profoundly seriously. For Wagner, this wasn't a joke. It was the absolute core of the drama.
So in Wagner's version, Senna's faithfulness isn't funny, it's everything.
It's everything. In his libretto, or the poem, as he preferred to call it, which he finished around May 1841, Senna's vow to be faithful until death is presented with complete gravity. It's a statement that, yes, this kind of absolute sacrificial love is the force that can break curses and defy fate. He's basically throwing down the gauntlet against the cynicism he saw in writers like Heine.
That's a massive shift in perspective, taking satire and making it deadly earnest.
And it defines the whole opera. It's fascinating, too, that some of the key musical pieces were composed quite early during that desperate Paris period.
Before he even knew if the full opera would happen.
Seems so. Between May and July 1840, probably for that failed audition attempt with Pillet, he wrote Senna's ballad.
The heart of her character, really.
Absolutely. And the Norwegian sailor song, that famous chorus Stormen Last i Wacht.
Right.
And the contrasting, ghostly chorus of the Dutchman's crew. He was clearly trying to showcase the most striking original musical ideas he had.
Even if Pillet wasn't buying it at the time. It's amazing that Senna's ballad comes out of that period of poverty and rejection.
Yeah, the core emotional moments were there early on. Then, after the rejection, he really knuckled down and composed the rest of the opera quite quickly, mostly in the summer of 1841.
Driven by that new seriousness, perhaps.
Probably. Driven by the need to prove himself, and by this powerful theme he'd embraced. The famous overture, the piece that sums it all up, was actually written last.
And the orchestration was done by November 1841. He also changed the setting.
He did. The very first draft was set in Scotland, maybe tapping into that sort of gothic, misty atmosphere. But shortly before the premiere in Dresden in 1843, he changed it to the coast of Norway.
Bringing it back to his own experience.
Exactly. Directly connecting the opera setting to that harrowing sea journey he'd endured near Tvedestrand. It makes it much more personal, more visceral.
It really does. Okay, so we've got the desperate backstory, the literary transformation. Let's talk about what makes this opera a real turning point, musically and structurally. Why is this seen as the start of the real Wagner?
Well, Wagner himself saw it that way later on. In an essay from 1851, he called it his farewell to the mere concocter of opera texts. He felt this was where he stopped just writing operas and started creating something deeper, merging the music and the drama.
The beginning of the total work of art idea.
A definite precursor, yeah. He's moving towards that Gesamtkunstwerk, and the most obvious sign of that is the structure he originally intended.
You mentioned this earlier, performing it all in one go.
That's right, no intermissions. He wrote it to flow continuously, linking the scenes seamlessly. This was radical for the time.
How so? What was the norm?
The norm was opera divided into clear acts, and within those acts, distinct musical numbers, arias, duets, choruses, often followed by applause breaks. It broke the dramatic tension.
Wagner wanted none of that.
He wanted relentless focus. He wanted the audience swept up in the drama without interruption, like a single unfolding wave.
It's interesting because today, while you can see it performed in one act sometimes,
Which is incredibly powerful, that feeling of inevitable fate.
it's much more common to see the three-act version.
It is. But the crucial thing is, he didn't fundamentally rewrite the music for that three-act structure. He just found places to, well, insert breaks into the continuous flow he'd already composed. The underlying musical journey remains unbroken.
Like the ocean current underneath.
Exactly. It still has that feeling of relentless movement.
And that flow is also achieved through his use of leitmotifs, right? This is where they really start to become prominent.
Oh, absolutely. This is a huge step forward from his earlier works. He uses these recurring musical themes leitmotifs, or leading motifs tied to specific characters, objects, or ideas.
Like musical labels.
More than labels, they're like musical building blocks that carry psychological weight. They interact, transform, clash with each other in the orchestra, telling a story underneath the words.
And the overture is basically an introduction to these key themes.
It's much more than an introduction. It's like a sonic argument laying out the whole conflict. It kicks off with that incredibly famous stormy motif.
The storm, or the Dutchman's curse itself.
Right, that feeling of wild, relentless fate. Then you hear the brooding theme associated with the Dutchman himself. And crucially, contrasting with all that darkness, you get the theme for Senta, often called the redemption motif.
So the overture sets up the battle between the curse and the possibility of redemption through Senta.
Precisely. That musical tension is established before anyone even sings a note. The whole opera is, in a sense, the playing out of that conflict introduced in the overture.
Let's talk about the forces required to bring this conflict to life. The voices, the orchestra. It demands a lot, doesn't it?
It really does. The role of the Dutchman needs a powerful bass baritone. That lower, darker voice really conveys the weight of his eternal curse, that sense of ancient suffering.
And Senta.
She's a high dramatic soprano. She needs immense power and intensity to soar over the orchestra, embodying that single-minded, almost obsessive force of will and faithfulness.
And the other roles. Delam, the father.
He's a bass, more grounded, maybe more representative of the mundane material world, especially given his greed. Eric, the rejected lover, is a tenor, often conveying that more conventional earthly love that Senta rejects.
And the orchestra itself is pretty large for the time.
It is a standard romantic orchestra setup, but Wagner uses it with incredible color and power. But what's really unique is his use of on-stage instruments to create atmosphere.
For the ghost ship.
Exactly. To conjure that eerie, supernatural presence of the Dutchman's crew, the score calls for specific instruments to be played on stage, or at least sound like they are.
What kind of instruments?
Things like 3 piccolos, adding a shrill, almost unnatural edge, and significantly, 6 horns playing on stage. Imagine that sound, multiple horns, maybe slightly distant or distorted, creating this unsettling fanfare for the spectral crew.
And other sounds, too.
Yes, crucially, a tam-tam, that big resonant gong which gives those deep, booming, metallic sounds, it adds to the feeling of something ancient, spectral, almost otherworldly about the Dutchman's ship.
And you can't forget the wind machine.
Definitely not. Wagner wanted total immersion. He didn't just want you to hear about the storm, he wanted you to feel it. That wind machine adds that visceral layer of the tempestuous sea, the environment that defines the Dutchman's curse. It's all part of making the supernatural feel terrifyingly real.
That attention to sonic detail is really something. Okay, with all that context, let's walk through the story itself. The deep dive synopsis set on the Norwegian coast, Act 1.
Right, Act 1 opens with Daland, the Norwegian captain, sailing near home. But a storm blows up, a real storm this time. Not a supernatural one, yet forcing him to anchor near Sandwich.
He leaves his steersman on watch.
Yeah, and the steersman sings a little song about his sweetheart in the sea. Mitgewitter en storm aus fernem Meer. But, long journey, tired. He falls asleep.
A crucial lapse.
Exactly, because the moment earthly vigilance fails, the supernatural arrives. A ghostly ship, the Dutchman's, appears out of nowhere, crashes against Daland's, and grappling irons lash them together. Sails furl instantly by unseen hands. It's sudden and terrifying.
And then the Dutchman himself appears.
Steps ashore, pale, dressed in black, black beard, the picture of tormented nobility. And he sings his great aria, Die Fries is the time is up.
Explaining his curse.
He reveals he's cursed to sail forever because he once rashly invoked Satan during a storm. The only hope, given by an angel, is that every 7 years he can land. If he finds a woman who promises to be true till death and is true, he's saved.
But if she's unfaithful?
He's damned, and she's damned along with him for breaking the vow, and he has to sail on. 7 more years pass, another chance arrives. It's an endless cycle of hope and despair.
So Daland wakes up to find this spectral figure on the shore next to his ship.
He does, and the Dutchman explains his plight, adding that he's incredibly wealthy from centuries of voyaging. He asks Daland if he has a daughter.
And Daland sees an opportunity.
Instantly, he hears wealthy and daughter, and the wheels start turning. The Dutchman offers a chest full of treasure for Senta's hand in marriage.
And Daland just agrees. To marry his daughter off to this obviously cursed, ghostly stranger?
Tempted by gold, absolutely. He agrees on the spot. It's a stark contrast. The Dutchman's eternal torment meets Daland's very earthly greed. They strike the bargain, the wind miraculously changes in their favor, and they set sail for Daland's home.
Which brings us to Act 2, inside Daland's house. A very different atmosphere.
Completely different. We see the local girls, including Senta, working at their spinning wheels. They sing the famous spinning chorus, Som brum de Gusrechen. It's cozy, domestic, rhythmic.
But Senta's not joining in.
No, she's completely detached from it all. She's staring intently at a portrait hanging on the wall.
The portrait of the Flying Dutchman.
The very one. She's obsessed with the legend, consumed by this desire, this almost predestined feeling that she is the one meant to save him.
Her nurse Mary isn't happy with this obsession.
Not at all. Mary tries to get her to focus on her work, but Senta, against Mary's wishes, launches into her ballad.
Where she tells the whole story of the Dutchman's curse.
Yes, she recounts the legend, explaining how Satan took him at his word. And as she sings, her own conviction grows, culminating in this passionate declaration, a vow, really, that she will be the one to save him through her fidelity.
And just as she makes this vow, someone else arrives.
Eric, the huntsman, Senta's sort of boyfriend, or at least someone who loves her and thought they had an understanding, he overhears her intense vow and is deeply disturbed.
He tries to warn her.
He does. He tells her about a dream he had, a nightmare, really, where he saw Daland returning with a mysterious pale stranger who then carried Senta away to sea. He's trying to show her the danger, the darkness in her obsession.
But Senta's reaction isn't fear.
Not at all. She listens with delight, almost excitement. She interprets Eric's warning dream as confirmation of her destiny. This stranger is coming for her. Yeah. He's heartbroken and despairing. He sees he can't compete with a legend, with this powerful fantasy she's built. He leaves, dejected.
And then,
Right on cue, Daland arrives with the actual Dutchman.
the man from the portrait, standing right there.
Exactly, and Senta is transfixed. Daland tries to introduce the stranger as her future husband, boasting about the treasure, but Senta barely seems to notice her father. Her eyes are locked on the Dutchman.
A moment of instant recognition.
It feels like it. The music swells, weaving their themes together, the curse, the redemption. They are drawn to each other immediately.
And Daland just leaves them alone.
Pretty much. He's probably off counting his gold. Senta and the Dutchman are left alone, and they launch into this incredibly intense duet.
Where she makes her vow official.
Absolutely. She looks him in the eye and swears she will be true to him, faithful, until death itself. No hesitation, total commitment. The act ends on this powerful, fateful promise.
Okay, Act 3. Things must come to a head here. It's later that evening.
Yes, down by the harbor. And Wagner sets up this brilliant contrast. On one side, you have Daland's sailors celebrating their return. They're singing, drinking, full of life.
Normal human celebration.
Exactly. They even call over to the Dutchman's ship, which is moored nearby, shrouded in silence, inviting the crew to join them.
But they get no response.
Just an eerie silence.
Yeah.
Then suddenly the mood shifts. Ghostly blue lights appear on the Dutchman's ship. Strange, ethereal singing is heard.
The spectral crew.
Ghostly forms are seen working silently on the deck. The wind seems to howl around their ship specifically. Daland's men, who are just celebrating, are terrified. They fall silent and retreat in fear. The supernatural is asserting itself.
And Senta arrives in the middle of this.
She does. But she's followed by Eric, who makes one last desperate plea.
He confronts her about her vow to the Dutchman.
He confronts her, yes, but more importantly, he reminds her of her past with him. He asks her, didn't she once pledge her love to him? Didn't she vow constancy to him before this stranger ever appeared?
Prior commitment, even if there wasn't the same life or death vow.
Exactly, and this is the fatal moment. The Dutchman, who has been listening nearby, hears Eric's words.
And he misinterprets it.
He hears vow and constancy to another man, and he despairs. He instantly assumes Senta is like all the others, that she cannot offer the perfect, untainted fidelity required. He believes he's lost again forever.
He doesn't wait for an explanation.
No, he's convinced it's over. Overwhelmed by despair, thinking he's doomed Senta too if she breaks her vow to him, he rushes to leave. He summons his ghostly crew, tells a shocked Senta about the terrible consequences for women who swear faithfulness to him and then falter.
Revealing his true identity.
Yes, he cries out that he is Der Fliegende Holländer, the Flying Dutchman. He boards his ship, ready to sail away into eternal damnation, believing he's sparing her a worse fate.
But Senta hasn't faltered.
Not for a second. This is where Wagner drives home that literal interpretation of redemption. She sees him leaving, understands his despair is based on a misunderstanding, and takes the ultimate action.
She runs towards the cliff edge.
Yes, overlooking the sea where his ship is departing, and she cries out, reaffirming her vow, claiming her fidelity is absolute. She will be faithful unto death.
And then she jumps.
She throws herself into the sea, a total physical sacrifice to prove the truth of her vow.
And the effect is immediate.
Instantaneous and dramatic, the spectral ship, the vessel of his curse, immediately sinks beneath the waves, disappearing forever. The curse is broken.
And what happens to Senta and the Dutchman?
In the final moments, their transfigured forms are seen ascending towards heaven. Her sacrifice has not only proven her fidelity, but has purchased his salvation. It's a truly stunning and maybe unsettling conclusion.
Wow, that is intense. You really see how Wagner's own traumatic experiences, that storm, that flight, get poured into this mythological framework.
Absolutely. And it loops back perfectly to what he intended artistically. This wasn't just about telling a story or escaping death. It was a statement. The start of his real journey as an artist trying to fuse music and drama into something transcendent. He wasn't just writing operas anymore. He felt he was writing destiny, exploring these huge themes of fate, sacrifice, and redemption.
So summing up the key things for you, the listener, to take away from this deep dive. First, you've got the incredible backstory, this major work emerging directly from Wagner's personal and financial crisis, his literal flight.
And then there's that crucial transformation of the source material, taking Hein's irony and making it deadly serious, centering the whole thing on Senta's literal sacrificial fidelity. That's a core Wagnerian move right there.
And musically, you can now recognize those revolutionary steps. The idea of continuous music, the way leitmotifs start to weave the psychological narrative, and even those specific orchestral colors like the tam-tam or the wind machine used to build that spectral atmosphere.
It really lays the groundwork for everything that comes later. It demands a certain commitment from the listener, too, doesn't it? You have to buy into the intensity of it all.
Which leads us perfectly to our final provocative thought for you to chew on.
Right. Think about that ending. The Dutchman finds redemption, his curse is broken, but only because Senta proves her perfect fidelity by dying. Her sacrifice is the price of his salvation. So the question to mull over is this. Is Wagner, even this early on, suggesting that this kind of ultimate self-destructive female sacrifice is the highest form of love, the only force strong enough to overcome eternal darkness?
Or is he perhaps setting a template, a demanding and perhaps troubling ideal of female devotion and martyrdom that we see echoed in many of his later heroines?
It's something to think about, definitely. Is it purely about redemptive love, or is there a more complex, maybe even problematic view of sacrifice being established here? Something to consider the next time you hear that haunting Dutchman motif echoing through the theater.